for those of you that have already joined, we're just going to give it a minute before we kick off, just to give everybody a chance to log into the webinar. So we are here, just give us a minute and we'll kick off shortly. Okay, right, well, we'll make a start now, and so there may be a couple more that join in, but I think that's hopefully given the system a chance to admit everybody to the webinar. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. This is the Pasture for Life Standards webinar. So this is talking about our latest release of the standards for ruminants, but it is also going to touch on sort of how we've got to where we are as well. So our agenda for this afternoon is going to introduce ourselves, the speakers. We're then going to talk about the principles behind the Pasture for Life standards, an overview of this version 4, and then go into some key topics within the standards that we have. So that's going to include animal nutrition, animal welfare, and sustainable pasture management. The last section of the webinar will be a Q&A. Can I ask you all to type questions that you have into the Q&A box? You can do that as you go along. What we'll try and do, if there's any questions that are about immediate clarification of what you've just heard, we'll try and deal with these as we go along. But otherwise, questions on the standards we will work through at the end. We've had a couple of questions submitted in advance by people who can't join us, so we'll deal with those as well. But to say that's the best way to engage with us is please use the Q&A box function in Zoom. So to start us off, we'll do introductions, and as I'm already speaking, I'll start. But we are one of 3 of the speakers on the call today, along with my colleagues Mike Tame and John Turner, who are sort of certification standards committee for the Pasture for Life Association and working on the Pasture for Life standards. So PFLA, Pasture for Life Association, which I'm sure you all know, but I know we've got some people who aren't members on, and then PFL is the Pasture for Life standards. I've been working with the Pasture for Life Association since 2011, which isn't quite when it started. It was formed slightly before that, but always been working with a focus on the standard side of things, setting the standards and certification procedures that go with that. My background is as an advisor, a consultant, working in livestock, and particularly animal welfare is one of my key topics. And one of the reasons that I wanted to be involved with the Pasture for Life Association is that the system of feeding ruminants entirely on grass and forages fits, and the system of management that goes with that fits with my aims to have good animal welfare and sustainable livestock production. So Mike, perhaps I could ask you to do a quick intro.
Okay, yeah. I kicked off my career in research before joining industry and working with the animal feed industry, but then set up a consultancy specializing in ruminant nutrition and forage management and animal health. Got interested in organics in the mid-90s, and in the early 2000s, with 3 others, was a founder member of Abacus Organic Services Limited, providing advice to organic farmers. I also then became an accredited organic inspector, which is where I met John Turner, who introduced me to PFLA. Oh, how long ago, John? 6-7 years ago, something like that. And this seemed to answer quite a number of questions that I'd got in my mind about how we ought to be treating and rearing ruminants, and it seems to me to be a much less stressful way of rearing them, providing a better quality end product. So that's really how I came to be with PFLA.
Thanks very much, Mike, and it's been great to have your expertise as we've been working through the standards. We've also got John Turner. John, you won't be able to see John on video because it's rural broadband. I'm sure many of you on this call will understand that. John is the photograph on the right of the three of us. But John, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi everybody. We farm in sort of South Lincolnshire, small family farm, and been involved. It's been a mixed farm ever since I was a young lad, and maybe the point where we came together and started this was back in 2009, and I think that's maybe a good starting point, just to remind ourselves why the PFLA came into existence and why we felt this was so important. And back then, 2009, we were hearing this term grass-fed quite widely, but it clearly didn't, it meant a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And at the time, we felt that the real big threat there was that sort of the big players, the multiples, the supermarkets were going to use the term grass-fed as the next big greenwashing thing. And we wanted, before that happened, to get hold of it and actually start to give it a definition, something that was distinct and something that really meant something. So after a couple of years of discussions, we came up with the very first interpretation, and we used for that, we looked across the Atlantic to what they were doing in the States. And at the time, they were something like 3 years ahead of us. So they'd done actually a lot of the groundwork, and it gave us a real sort of head start in terms of informing our standards and how we'd approach it. And we came up with a sort of a very rough draft. And that's where we brought Anna in, because with her sort of background and tremendous amount of experience, she turned those very rough drafts into something that was really fit for purpose. We started off with beef, thinking that was actually the one where there was most need to define it, because we were seeing a lot about grass-fed beef, which we knew was actually had a heck of a lot of cereals being put into it. And then we added sort of sheep later, dairy, and finally with this sort of fourth version of the standards, we just about cover, we think, most of the ruminant livestock products, just about. So coming back to this point of distinct, can we have the next slide, Anna?
Well, can I let I'll just let Johnny introduce himself quickly, and then, because we've also got, as you see here, we've also got Johnny, who's just here representing the PFLA board. Johnny, if you can do a brief intro, and then we'll get into the meat of the discussion.
Hi there, I'm Johnny Balfour. We have a mixed farm in Fife. We have 200 sucklers, finishing them off grass, arable and combined crops and vegetables, as well as a bit of forestry. Personally, I am the honorary treasurer of the PFLA board. I had a former career accountant, which put me in a good position to be in that position on the board, and I've been helping out with this standards review this year. I'm looking forward to answering any questions that come my way.
Great, thanks, Johnny. Sorry, so JT, yes, sorry to sort of interrupt your flow slightly there, but we'll go into the principles behind the Pasture for Life standards. So please go ahead.
Yeah, so in terms of sort of justifying this distinction, we felt that the bottom line is that for this to work, it's got to be viable as a farming system. And for it to be viable, you've got to have market, you've got to have customers. So we've always approached this from the perspective of the customer. What are they expecting? What are the things that they value? And importantly, what are the things that they are likely to support through their buying habits? So there's sort of three legs to the Pasture for Life story. There's the efficient and environmentally friendly land use. And I know all of those are, you know, very, very much nuanced words which are open to a lot of interpretation. But this is where the real benefit of actually having so many farmers involved and people with farming experience, because we can talk, we know what good husbandry is, and we know what good soil health is. So when we talk about efficient and environmentally friendly land use, it should be just echoing those principles of good land management, good soil, you know, looking after the soil, building organic matter. But importantly, the efficient land use is crucial here, and we'll come on to that in in just a minute. The second part, the second leg to the story is about animal welfare, and we know from the customer research that we've done that this is always very high on people's expectations. Pasture for Life is setting itself towards the top of the standards. It is one of the sort of gold standards. That's really where we're trying to place it in people's perceptions. So animal welfare has to be up there along with the very best of them. And the last one is food quality. People expect when they get a Pasture for Life piece of meat, Pasture for Life certified milk, that it is going to be something special about it. And we know that there is, you know, there is a very strong relationship between what the cow eats and that food quality. And in terms of distinctiveness, that's something that really comes through. And all of the criteria, we try to make sure are underpinned by solid science. Next slide, please, Anna. Thank you. So going back to this land use, efficient land use, when I came into this, there was a lot of talk about how we feed this growing world population of 9. It's sometimes now talked about 10 billion people by 2050. And it seemed to me that we were actually, there was a lot of the current land use, which is completely unsustainable. So rather than looking at these sort of very high-tech solutions, we could actually achieve a heck of a lot by just revisiting how we use land and make sure that's done efficiently. So in terms of the resources, the finite resources that are being depleted, fossil fuels was a big one. We were talking at the time about peak oil and that sort of thing. We know about the degradation to the soils. That's been an ongoing thing. Depletion of aquifers. These are all finite resources, and we felt that ruminant livestock and the way we rear them have all got a part to play in the solution for that. Forests, in particular, we were associating soya production in South America with the destruction of rainforests. And there again, there's a direct relationship between how we rear animals and the environmental impact of them. And at the moment, the figure is somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 of the cultivatable land in the planet is used for producing animal feed. And particularly the ruminant animals are actually very poor converters of that. You need somewhere between 7 and 13 units of protein in to every 1 that you get out. So there's a huge scope here for improving the efficiency. Thank you, Anna. So if we were to make sure that the first use of cultivatable land is for human consumption, direct human consumption, then the efficiency really starts to work in the favour. And you can get to the point where we can use 1 world's worth of resources to produce enough food to feed this 10 billion people at 2050. That work's being done, the modelling's being done, so we know it works. And what we're trying to do is make sure that Pasture for Life is right at the centre of this. It is part of the solution for the future food systems. And certainly within the UK, with all this focus on soil health in particular, there's a lot of talk about wouldn't we be better just to rewild, or just get rid of the animals because they're an environmental liability. And we know from farming that that's far too simple. simplistic. It doesn't recognise this fantastic symbiosis that exists between cattle and soil. You need the cattle. They are a fundamental part in rebuilding soil health, and we just have to make sure that the other parts of the rearing system minimise their environmental impact. Thank you, Anna.
JT, I'm just going to say, I know I can see that some people are having trouble hearing. I know, and I'm sorry, JT's connection's not fabulous. I would say that you are talking to the slides, so even if you're struggling to hear, then hopefully if people can just sort of focus on the slides, and a lot of these topics we will touch on again later in the presentation. But apologies if you're having trouble hearing, please stick with us.
Thank you, Anna. This is one of the troubles of being in deepest, darkest Lincolnshire. We're just one up from the carrier pigeon at the moment, so please bear with us. Animal welfare, we tend to, we are aware of these very intensive systems, which unfortunately are still, economics are driving livestock production that way, particularly with the CAFO beef systems that we see in the US, but increasingly in the UK, dairy in particular is going this way, but very much larger herds. And there is a direct link between the production levels that we're demanding out of animals and the impact that it's having on environmental health. Thank you, Anna. So the idea of the Pasture for Life standards is that by returning to a diet that's more closely matched to the way that the cattle have evolved over thousands of years, then it does actually address an awful lot of these animal welfare issues. And if we think of something like dairy animals that are fed vast amounts of protein, to get those production levels, you then get the knock-on effects of foot problems, of locomotion problems because of the size of the udders and that sort of thing. So by returning the animal to a more natural diet, the source of those problems is actually addressed. And customers who are looking for pasture-fed, certified produce have high expectations about the way the animals are reared and the life that they'll enjoy. Thank you. And I said earlier on about the need to underpin all this with science, but the great thing about the Pasture for Life diet as well for the animal is that that's reflected in the quality of the produce. And there is clear scientific evidence that by focusing on the right diet for the animal, good balanced diet, slower growing, that it's much higher in things like vitamin E, vitamin B, beta carotene, and there's a huge, the nutritional value is more than just the analysis. There's an awful lot that comes in taste and the way that those foods can actually be used. Thank you, Anna. So in terms, when we actually set out to define pasture-fed standards, we keep referring back to one or two sort of tenets, things that we always ask ourselves, is this meeting a certain expectation? One of them is that it has to be distinct. We started off by addressing this because grass-fed was just too loose a term. It's being used and abused. Grass-fed has to be distinct, and it has to be very clearly different to the general term grass-fed. When we're looking at things like global land use, and we're making we are highlighting the inefficient use of feeding cereals to animals, to ruminant animals, which is an important part of this. If we just simply substitute one system of land use that still ties up that crop during that agricultural year for feeding the animal, to some extent it doesn't really matter whether that's grain or whether it's say whole crop or something like that. So we have to be very careful when we're addressing some of these issues to make sure that we're not just substituting soya, let's say, for something that is literally equally damaging in terms of the land use that we were trying to address. The second one is coming back to the quality of the produce, that if we're making a claim that Pasture for Life is better, we need to make sure that that is underpinned by the science. And certainly when we're looking at things like Brassicas, we have to make sure that the science is there to ensure that those quality benefits aren't being undermined by introducing a different feed into the diet of the animal. And lastly, and this is Mike's area, which he'll cover in far more detail, but animal welfare is first and foremost, so it has to be a balanced diet for the animal. So particularly, I said when we started off with beef and then we moved on to sheep, and I think all of us felt that sheep were going to be the very easiest livestock category to cover in all of this. In many respects, sheep are probably the ones where the diet, there is a risk of undermining good animal health through the Pasture for Life if we take it in its purest form. So this is again where we bring the experience of the farmers and all that to bear, just to make sure that animal welfare is first and foremost. And the last point is the one at the bottom of this slide, which is it's the perception from the customer again. And to borrow from, it's a legal profession term, but what would the person on the Clapham omnibus expect? When we say Pasture for Life, Pasture-Fed, Pasture for Life, all these terms, what would they envisage? What would they think is acceptable? So that's one of the ones that we quite often come back and ask ourselves. Thank you, Andy. And the very final point in this section is it's a reminder to all ourselves that becoming certified as Pasture for Life, it is a voluntary thing. And if anybody at any point feels actually it's not going to fit my system, or this is a squeeze, there's a squeeze to be done here, and we start talking about what's allowed, what I'm allowed to do and what I'm not allowed to do, then that's the point at which I think it's probably important that we all remind ourselves that it's not for everybody, and that there are other very good sustainable farming systems out there for one reason or another don't fit into what we have chosen to define as Pasture for Life. And our hope is that the PFLA is a broad enough church, and it's such a positive community that all aspects where we recognise the value of pasture can be reflected. But yeah, Pasture for Life standards, we accept that it's not going to be for everybody. It can't, by its very definition, as a distinct method of production, cover everybody, but hopefully it's a good balance between all of those considerations.
Great. Thank you very much, John, for battling through the difficulties of connection. Hopefully the next sections will be a bit easier to listen to for everybody. But I mean, it was really important to start with those principles, because everything comes from there. All the sort of, we quite often get asked questions, why is this allowed in the standards or not allowed in the standards? And really that section that John's just presented, it is the key to all of that. It's like, this is what we're building the standards from. So coming now, as I say, to talking about this version 4, which is the set of standards we're on now. As John and I both said in the introductions, we started doing these standards in, 2010, 2011, and we've always been very aware that it wasn't a question of writing a set of standards, sitting back and saying, that's it, we never need to look at them again. We have progressively, we started with beef, we've added dairy and sheep, and the standards have evolved through that time as well, always with a process of consultation with not only with our membership, and including certified and non-certified farmers, but also with external bodies as well. So just to sort of set the scene for where we are with certification, and particularly version 4. The thing now, which again I think John mentioned, we're basically now, we're not saying, oh, this is just beef and this bit's just sheep and this is just dairy. We're covering all ruminants, and for both meat and for dairy production. So that is your beef and dairy cattle, your meat and dairy sheep, your meat and dairy goats, but that could be deer as well. It could be bison if somebody wants to do that. I think we're just about to import bison into the UK for the first time in I don't know how long, but yeah, so it is now, it's an all-inclusive ruminant standard. Within the standard, for those of you that have had a chance to take a look, there are some standards that are, for example, specific to sheep or specific to cattle, but those are clearly highlighted. But the basic framework is that these standards apply to all ruminants. So, and then also to point out that when we're talking about all ruminants, and I've talked about meat and dairy as sort of food products, we are also certifying, we can potentially certify wool, we could certify mohair, and also sheepskin and leather as well. We're basically saying if we're certifying this animal, we'll certify the products. We are registered, the trademark, the Pasture for Life certification mark is registered as a trademark with the Intellectual Property Office, and the standards and the categories of products that we certify are also registered. So as part of this version 4 of the standards, that registration is being updated to include wool and leather, so that the certification mark can be applied to those as well. So note here, it's a farm level, at the farm level of certification, it's an enterprise-based certification. It's not necessarily the entire farm. So if a farmer has beef and sheep, they can, for example, choose only to certify the beef herd and not the sheep herd. We've definitely had people that have certified one species first and then looks to bring in other species over time. So at the farm level, it's enterprise-based certification, not a whole farm certification. And then beyond the farm gate, we are certifying butchers, creamery, further processing. We're basically ensuring that if a consumer is picking, you know, a pie or a ready meal or something off the shelf that has Pasture for Life designation on it, that we know we can trace that back through certified businesses, that we have that confidence, credibility and traceability within that. So that's just a very brief overview of what the standards cover. So I'm actually going to hand back to Mike now, because we're going to take a bit of a deeper dive into the actual standards. I'm just going to go back to this slide on nutritional value, I think was where you just wanted to start us off, Mike. So
yes, that's right.
Go ahead.
Okay. Really just want to go back to the nutritional value of the end product. And say a little bit about the benefits and how they're derived. You can see here that there's quite a good list of the benefits of Pasture for Life end products. So higher omega-3 fatty acids, omega-6 fatty acids, there's a better ratio of 3 and 6, more conjugated linoleic acid, which is a potential cancer fighter, higher levels of vitamins, and some minerals too. The point I want to make here is that all of these benefits, excuse me, appear to be derived from the green leafy parts of the plants that the animals are fed. And that's an important thing to keep in the back of your mind as we go through the standards. Now, can we go on to slide 12, please, Anna?
Yeah, there we go, Mike.
Thank you. Now, because the benefits are derived from the green leafy parts of the plants, there are a list here of feeds that are prohibited. And the reason for that is that if these feeds are introduced, we start to lose those benefits and lose them very quickly. So you can see here that there are grains, dry harvested grain, legumes, maize, silage, soya, and so on. But the change to the standards that have been made in this review really apply to sugar beet and fodder beet, which I know are fed quite regularly to cattle. And the reason for including those on the prohibited list this time is that when these are fed, the green leaf part of the plant is not fed. In fact, the green leaf part of the plant is toxic when it's fresh because of the oxalic acid content. And it's the root only that's eaten. But the root of these products is very high in sugars, which behaves in the rumen in a similar fashion to grains, and that if these feeds are introduced, then we start to lose those nutritional benefits, which we're so keen to hang on to. So can we go to the next slide, please, Anna? So really, we are looking for grain-free diets, and that includes sprouted grains. We don't want any feeds that behave like grain feeds, and we really want to avoid feedstuffs that would negatively impact on those nutritional benefits that we see in the end product. On to the next one, please. Thank you. Now, there are a couple of things that we do allow. One of those is arable or whole crop silage, and this is a little bit controversial. In conventional agriculture, arable silage is usually taken when it's reached at least the soft dough stage in grain formation, which means that you've got quite good levels of sugars and you're starting to get starch levels increasing quite rapidly at this stage. Now, in view of what I've just said, this doesn't really fit with the PFLA principles. So what we're saying is that we will permit arable silage, but there are some quite strict limitations. First of all, not to be grown as a monocrop. There should be at least one other species in the mix, and that the cutting date must be before ear emergence or growth stage 59, so that the material that you're harvesting doesn't contain sugars and starches. Okay, everybody clear about that one? Can we go on to the next one? Yes, brassicas. Now, the other thing that we are allowing is brassicas, and the change here, again, not grown as a monocrop. There must be at least one other non-brassica species in the mix, and we only allow grazing of this crop, not harvesting of the roots. And with the other species that needs to be grown with it, the recommendation is that that should be a deep rooting plant as part of the mix. In the previous version of the standards, there was a limit on the amount of brassicas that could be used in the diet. We have actually now, in this version of the standards, the latest version, removed that limit. But you need to bear in mind that brassicas contain very little fibre, and that in order for the rumen to function properly, you need an intake of fibre. So there needs to be some fibrous material available as a supplement in the form of silage or hay or something of that nature. We're also concerned that very often with feeding brassicas, there could well be problems with poaching. So we need to be very mindful of how the land is managed and that we avoid poaching. And we also require that there is a dry lying area for the cattle while they're on the brassicas. Can we go on to the next one, please, Anna? Thank you. Now, I just wanted to talk a little bit about diverse forages, because that has some quite important implications for animal health. Now, it's becoming increasingly clear that the more diverse the sward that the animals are on, the greater the benefits. And the latest thinking seems to be that you need at least 8 different species of plant in the mix to really start to see these benefits. And some of the guys who are practicing regenerative agriculture these days are using as many as 20 different species in the mix. And the benefits for this are that you get a much better soil health. It improves soil health because of the microbial and mycorrhizal communities that develop in the soils. And as a result of that, you get better plant growth. And the other benefits that are beginning to emerge, that it seems that most of these very diverse mixes have a higher digestibility overall than the straight grass lay, and very often a higher protein content. So there are nutritional benefits for the animal in that sense. The other important point here is that lays that are based entirely on grass have very variable trace element contents, but they are generally quite low. If you introduce legumes into the mix, then that improves the trace mineral content, but the biggest improvement comes from including herbs in the mix. And herbs almost always have a very much higher mineral content, particularly trace mineral content, than a straight grass lay does. And this is really quite important when we come to animal health, because it helps to ensure that the animal is functioning properly, particularly with regard to immune systems and an ability to cope with stress and so on. So the more diverse the lay, the better it is, both for soil health and for animal production. So I think probably that's about as much as I want to say, Anna, at the moment.
That's great. Thank you very much, Mike. And again, sometimes the question we're asked is, do we have people who you know, we've slightly had it thrown at us sometimes, is, do you have anyone who knows anything about animal nutrition on your committee? It's like, we do. We have Mike, and hopefully just that short bit of explanation helps show that we are rooted. Our standards really do come back to what works for the animals whilst delivering on our principles as well. Thanks, Mike. So I'm going to do the next section, which is just talking about animal welfare. As mentioned earlier, this is a consumer expectation. The kind of people that buy Pasture for Life products have an expectation that these are coming from high welfare systems. And it's part of what we talk about as well, is that the animals are able to live in herds and flocks and naturally graze. And you know, it's part of what we're saying is the benefits of buying into these systems. So we need to define what we expect from good animal welfare. And in previous versions of the standards, we've made a statement to say we expect all our certified farmers to have good animal welfare, and the inspectors who have been going on farm and doing the certification audits would be able to pick up any instances of poor welfare, but we haven't really defined in standards what we mean by good welfare. So in this set of standards, we have done that. And one thing I just wanted to briefly point out, because it's something that not everybody is up to speed on, but most people have heard of the 5 freedoms of animal welfare. And the 5 freedoms are the freedom from fear and distress, freedom from hunger and thirst. You know, they tend to be talking about avoiding a negative situation. And in animal welfare science, there's been an evolution now to talk about the 5 domains of welfare. And this is really emphasizing the positive outcomes for welfare rather than just an avoidance of the negative. So we're using those references within our standards to show, again, that this is our intent, that these systems are promoting positive welfare. And the way the 5 domains work is there's the physical domains of welfare, which are very similar to the topics you would get in the 5 freedoms, but it's just framing them in a slightly different way. So it's nutrition and hydration, the environment, the animal's living environment, health status and behaviour. But then those 4 sort of feed into what is the mental state or the outcome for the animal. So again, it's also bringing in this point about we might be giving all what we think are all the right inputs, but is what the animal feels the right? Are we getting the right outcome? Are we getting that benefit? So we have the intent when we started this process was to at least match the requirements of the organic regulations on animal welfare. And obviously organic standards and pasture for life standards are different things, but we wanted to say, where do we want to be with welfare? We want to at least be the same requirements as organic farmers. But it is worth noting that in several areas, so for example, the maximum age for castration or tail docking, disbudding, this is actually UK legislation. So it shouldn't be something that is over and above massively what a good farmer is doing anyway. And we also wanted to make sure that we were covering the key topics of concern for all stakeholders. Now, some of our customers are incredibly engaged and hugely knowledgeable, and some of them are less so, but equally amongst our stakeholders we have animal welfare organisations. So we wanted to make sure we were covering all these sort of key topics, and I've sort of listed some of the main ones here. The staff competence, that the people looking after the animals know what they're doing, and that includes contract staff coming in, for example, for shearing sheep or anything like that. Health of the stock, including health planning. And again, this is much more about promoting positive health rather than reacting to health problems. Responsible use of antimicrobial medicines. This is a global issue, the overuse of antibiotics and other antimicrobials in livestock farming. It's really an issue in those very intensive systems that John was talking about much earlier, these sort of confinement situations and some of these very intensive dairies where you're almost sort of putting the animal in a situation which promotes health problems rather than promoting good health. But again, to show that we're recognising the issue, we're including this within standards as well. And then good practice for painful procedures such as castration, tail docking, minimum weaning ages, things like that. So as sort of our main topics. We then, within the section, again, this is sort of key tenet of our standards. It isn't just about, I stood this animal in a yard and I fed it all the right things. This is also about the animal's ability to go out and graze and select what it might be eating and where it wants to go. So this access to pasture required for all animals at all possible times. And what we mean by this all possible times is that if you're in a situation where your farm becomes a muddy mess in the winter, it doesn't do you or the animals or the soil health any good to require them to stand outside in the rain. So removal of animals from pasture when their welfare would be better served by having them indoors, for example, overwintering, is permitted by the standards. When they are housed, we have requirements around the space that they have, the fact they must have bedding, they've got to have natural light and natural ventilation. Just a reminder that we do require shade and shelter must be provided as necessary on pasture as well as in housing as well. And then other key topics we cover on animal welfare are handling, transport, and we have a small section on slaughter as well. And the main point with our slaughter is that if an animal is going to be certified pasture for life, or if the meat is going to be certified pasture for life, the animal must be stunned prior to slaughter. And we've also introduced a section on outcome assessments, and then this is slightly going back to my sort of point about the 5 domains, that we can say we're putting all the right inputs in, but what's the outcome for the animal? So it's picking some key outcomes which look at what is the state of the animal, and it might be things like mortality, and it can be lameness, but it's just sort of things that give you an idea of the outcome of the system that you're putting together, as it were, or the system that you're offering the animal. And then within the standards as well, we've also provided recommendations for best practice that go over and above. And recommendations for certification, a farmer doesn't have to meet recommendations. So they can, you know, we still like the inspectors to look at them at farm audit, because we can see whether people are taking them up or not. But it's almost like a guidance. They were the things we'd say, you know, in an ideal world, we'd love this to be happening, but we know it isn't sort of common practice necessarily right now, or may not be completely available right now. So the top one here, pain relief, which is globally a really up and coming topic in terms of you know, people buying products, and not just meat products, but looking at one key example would be the fashion industry buying wool. The requirements for pain relief are coming up in a lot of those certifications. And again, we want to be sort of ahead of the curve here. There should have been a product called, marvelous product name, Numbnuts, which is a way of providing local anaesthetic at the point that you, when you're using band or rubber ring castration, it would be providing an anaesthetic at the point of doing it, as all part of the same tool. That was supposed to be commercially available in the UK. It was developed in Australia, commercially available in the UK this year. And I think, unfortunately, that COVID has put paid to some of their global expansion, but hopefully should be available next year. And we also, we know we have farmers, again, on sort of painful procedures. We have farmers who, when they are disbudding their calves, rather than just using the local anaesthetic, are actually also additionally using sedation. So that, again, really minimising the pain that the animal feels. So these are things that we're recommending people look into, obviously in discussion with their vets as well. And then another one we've added is enrichment for housed animals. Again, this is something that dairy farms, quite commonly, people are now putting in brushes for dairy cows, and really seeing that the cows absolutely love them when they're housed, because it's something they can go and scratch against. And these go from the really fancy ones that are almost motion activated. When the cow gets near, it starts turning, that you think, my goodness, this is quite an investment. But it can be as simple as a brush head bolted onto the wall, just something that the animal can address. And then for sheep and goats, you see here, these are housed lambs that are playing on a straw bale. And it's just those kind of things. Again, it's just sort of saying, let's just think, if we want to show that we're providing best welfare at all times, these are sort of included in the standards as sort of signposts or guidelines. And then I will also touch on feeding sheep pre-lambing. As John said, we thought sheep would be straightforward, and when we started doing standards on it, and it sort of wasn't. A lot of this is looking at people transitioning to pasture for life practices from their current situation as much as anything else, and moving from what has always been done to where you might want to get to. And we really were concerned that, particularly if you have ewes that are carrying triplets, in the later stage of pregnancy, the rumen capacity is so reduced by the fact that the lambs, the growing lambs, are taking up so much room within the internal organs of the animal, that if we insisted on a entirely grass-based diet, we potentially had welfare issues. So we have had, since we introduced sheep standards, we have had an allowance to feed what I've called here at-risk ewes, non-forage feeds pre-lambing for animal welfare reasons. We used to allow it on an ongoing basis, but actually, as part of stepping back and sort of going back to first principles, is to say that we have got quite a few sheep farmers who manage not to do this. And we've sometimes found as well that the people who want to feed pre-lambing are also the people who want to feed at flushing, which actually we don't allow. But it's almost that point of that doesn't, if we're pushing the system to its absolute limits and really trying to get every ewe to have twins and lots to have triplets, that doesn't really fit with the model of pasture for life. So what we're now saying is this can be done, this sort of feeding of ewes, again, still specifically these at-risk ewes that would otherwise be have potentially a welfare problem. And it can be done on a transition period for 3 years. So it's for those who are already certified to our old standards, it's 3 years from the implementation of these standards, and new farmers coming in, it'll be 3 years from first certification. So it's basically 3 years from when we've told people about it, because we can't expect existing farmers to change overnight. There is a point here though, that within the standards, we have an overarching standard that says if you have an individual animal who needs to be fed a non-forage feed for its health and welfare, you can always do that. In fact, we say you must do that. It's just if it's a meat animal, you are going to lose status on it. But we don't want people to withhold feeds, prohibited feeds, just to try and keep status on an animal that for its health and welfare really needs to be fed. So when I'm talking about this saying you've got a 3-year transition process, it's a 3-year transition process, thinking about this on a flock-wide basis. If you ever came across a situation down the line where you had, a small number of individual ewes that you've identified, then you'd have to talk to us about it. But for their welfare, you would be able to feed them grain. And the allowance for this is the non-forage feeds can be offered from 6 weeks before the expected lambing date, but they have to stop by 72 hours post lambing. It can't exceed more than 40% of daily intake on a dry matter basis. So we're still saying this is a forage-based diet, even if we are allowing this amount of non-forage feeds. And those ewes that have eaten these grain, they could never be sold as pasture for life mutton at the end of their lives. So it's sort of saying, yeah, you can feed them, but they're not going to be pasture for life. But their lambs could still hold certification if they're managed to pull full pasture for life standards throughout their lives. So this one has been it's always been a tricky one for us, but because animal welfare has got to be one of our key tenets, this was the way to that we've decided to deal with this one. So I think that's my last one on animal welfare. I am conscious that, as ever, we're all able to talk far more than we think we can. So we haven't got a huge amount of time on the schedule. So John, you've got the land, there's only a couple of land management ones, but could you keep this on the sort of top line summary level, and then we can go to the questions? Is that all right?
Yeah, absolutely. So the management of the pasture, these are standards that were introduced, I think, on the third manifestation of the standards. We worked in the early days with RSPB and some of the other nature organisations just to get their thoughts on it. But really, they reflect, just comes back to good land husbandry, really, that we are looking to build soil nutrients, soil organic matter, soil microbiological activity. These are all things that are going to be reflected in the upcoming ELMS stewardship schemes. They're widely recognised as objectives of farming. It's nice that Pasture for Life just reflecting those. We are moving away in all of the standards from any form of monocultures, and that's not a prohibited thing. That is just reflecting what good practice is. And we found when, although it is a little bit alien to some people, when they've actually used these and seen the benefits of them, it's represented a real step forward. So there again, the PFLA standards are really just reflecting good practice. Artificial fertilizers, we're not, the idea of these is that they're a lot more flexible than organic standards, but nevertheless, it's still, we need to recognize the damage that artificial fertilizers can actually cause, particularly to the soil microbiological activity, changing the pH of the soil. And really, if we've got good soils with nitrogen fixing plants within there, the use of artificial fertilizers is very much diminished, and it's a cost as well. Why put in something that's a cost when actually you can get the whole thing for free by putting in more diverse layers. Similarly, there's a focus on non-chemical weed control. Rotations should be able to manage most of the problem weeds, but there again, where we vary and provide a little bit more scope than organics and a little bit more latitude, is that we do allow weed control as a spot treatment for specific areas. Thank you. And the big one for us this with this version 4 of the standards was glyphosate. We talked earlier about customer expectations and customer perceptions, and there is a lot of focus on the potential impact of glyphosate. So what we have said is that based on the research that's there at the moment, there aren't any parts of the active part of lays and forage production for ruminant livestock where any forage that's been treated with glyphosate can actually form part of the diet. There is a lot of the, particularly in rotational systems, there is quite a bit of the farming year that is outside of pasture for life, so arable crops, and the PFLA standards can't control what goes on in there. But certainly when it is in the forage part of the rotation, we have taken, based on the best scientific advice, the decision to prohibit glyphosate. Wildlife and biodiversity, really, as I say, this was based on a lot of the input from the wildlife organisations, but particularly reflecting as well a lot of the stewardship schemes, that the responsibility for maintaining natural habitats, the natural capital on the farm, and the pasture for life standards really just reflect that. One of the areas, hay cutting, I know has caused some problems in the past, but we've refined these over the years, and we think we've now come up with something that is a very good balance between providing the best biodiversity outcomes, but it is still practical in terms of good farming year and being able to produce forage off it. Thank you.
Thanks, John. That's great. Sorry to sort of rush that last bit, but I just wanted, we have had a few questions come in, and as I say, we've had a couple that were submitted earlier. I'm not necessarily going to do these in order, and actually one of the ones that came in relatively recently was saying, actually, Jimmy, you might have to unmute and answer this one, but have we, have we actually asked people, have we asked the person on the CAPM omnibus what they think pasture for life is? And the answer to that is yes. We have done consumer surveys on, and sort of what people expect from pasture for life, what they understand about it as well. So I that might be enough just now, but we I don't know, Jimmy, if you want to say anything, Jimmy, feel free. But
hi everyone. I think I would just add that actually our recent survey that we did of our wider consumer base actually suggested that consumers on the whole think grass is the easier term to use. So while that's not directly kind of answering the question, I think it points to the fact that people are looking for simplified terms, and obviously these standards have evolved over the last 10 or 9 years based on numerous consumer surveys, and I think we the group on this call feel comfortable with our approach. Thanks,
Jimmy. Sorry, I know you're not supposed to be on this, but thank you for being there and answering that. And then we had another question, which I know, John, you sort of started answering in the chat box, but I think it's a good one we can just bring out as well, about this point of taking everything back to saying diversity is all, if you like, that we're saying, and it's, I think the question is quite useful in teasing out whether we're talking about diversity in just what the animal eats or diversity in what's happening on the farm as well. So the question was about whether you could grow, for example, a stubble turnip crop, shall we say, but supplement that with a species-rich hay, and whether that would meet the requirements for the diversity in the animal's diet. But the way the standard is framed is that, that it's not just, it is about thinking, it is thinking outside the box, if you like, saying in these the diverse lays, and I think people have really got their heads around diverse lays in terms of grasses and herbs and all those kind of mixes, but actually doing that is as a mixed crop, cover crop, including brassicas as well. So as it stands, and the point was being made with the follow-up question, and I'm sure perhaps John or Mike can chip in as well. The follow-up question saying that if they're using a neighbour is growing the crop for them to graze, they may not have the input on what's being grown, and it does. Actually, the way we've framed the standard says you need to have control of growing that crop for precisely that reason. But we do understand that that may cause challenges for people. But Mike, could you just reiterate a bit about the sort of the whole thinking behind the brassicas and diverse cropping?
Well, yes, as you've already said, diversity is the key to the whole thing. Brassicas find to form part of the diet, but it doesn't satisfy all the animals' requirements, particularly that for fibre. So our recommendation is that it's not grown as a monoculture, that there is another species in there, or at least one other species in there, to try and provide a more balanced approach. The brassicas, of course, as I've already said, are very short of fibre, almost no fibre at all in the leaves. So you do need to think about what else you're feeding.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point as well, Mike, is we are, you know, saying, oh, well, we could be feeding stubble turnips, I say, just as an example, and species-rich hay. It's almost like the standards already, we're saying you have to grow that mixed crop of brassicas and something else, and feed the species-rich hay as well for your fibre source.
Yes.
Too. So
Yes.
Yeah. There's another question come in about, you know, is browsing on trees and shrubs allowed, and tree hay? And this is it's quite a useful question to explore, because we quite often get asked, are certain things allowed, certain forages allowed? It's almost, the way we've done it is that we've done our prohibited list, which is the key things that we say we prohibit, which were the sort of grains, dry grain, legumes, and the waste vegetables, and the fodder beet, and maize and soya and all those kind of things. And we do say that just because it's not on this list doesn't mean it's definitely permitted, but really it's like, if we're talking about forages, and we would say that the shrubs and the tree browsing and the tree hay, we do count all of those as forages, and the way that they are going to act in the rumen will be like other forages. So definitely as part of the mixed diet, there is no problem with that. It was easier within the standards to say, here is the list of things that are definitely prohibited, which is a relatively short list, rather than try and write the reams of things that are allowed. So we've done it that way round, just to answer that one. And then another one we had that actually came in, was submitted before we started the webinar, was about whole crop, which, as Mike mentioned, it's been quite contentious, the whole crop issue. And in previous versions of the standards, we did allow whole crop to be used that was cut quite a bit later. And we've really, again, coming back to our principles and saying, if we're cutting it at the time that, if you like, standard agricultural practice would dictate, we've already got quite a lot of starch there, and we're starting to get something that could be acting in the room in a different way. So the question we had in was, would we potentially be able to allow, you know, would we have less of an issue with whole crop, or might we be able to allow whole crop to be cut later if we just prohibited wheat as a whole crop source, with the rationale that wheat has a lot more gluten in it than oats or barley? And I think, again, Mike or John, feel free to chip in, but I think our feeling on that is that's a bit of a red herring, and that from our point of view, it really isn't about the gluten in the grain, it's about not feeding the grain in the first place. Hence we're getting to these dates that do allow you to, or allow a farmer to grow a different mix of cereals, you know, whichever cereal they want, with one other non-cereal, and make an arable silage from that, but it's cutting it before ear emergence, because then again we're being very, very clear.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things we've had a pushback on in the past, is when we say no grain, we've had occasionally other farmers say, but you allow whole crop and that's got grain in it. So it was just about bringing that back to that point.
Yes, I think so. It's really all about making sure that it's just green leaf that is used and not part of the grain. And again, it's a case of growing it as a mixed crop. And there are a number of combinations that can be used for example, growing cereals with peas or with vetches, or could be used as a nurse crop for establishing things like lucerne or sainfoin, or even a very diverse lay. But the point is, it should be cut while it's all still green leaf. As soon as the head emerges and we start grain production, that's too late. It's going to have adverse effects on the nutritional benefits.
That's great, thank you, Mike. Because I say, I know this has been we've had a lot of debate on that topic over the years, and you know, again, we're back to saying this set of standards. Again, this is our version 4 that we're presenting now. This is not the end of it. We will sort of been aiming to do a standards review every couple of years. Some of them have been smaller reviews or focused on one particular species, but you know, this one's been quite a big one, if you like, from that point of view. I'm just trying to see if I have any more questions. If anybody else is looking at the Q&A box, is there anything that I haven't answered? Let me just have a look here. I think we have dealt with all this. If anybody you know, if there's anything else, then please type it into the Q&A box now. It looks to me like we have answered the questions that we've been submitted. You can, if you go away from this webinar and suddenly think of something, please do email the office, the sort of info at Pasture for Life. You know, we're happy to sort of answer any questions like that. And obviously, access to the new standards, go to the Pasture for Life website, the certification page, and then there's a link to the certification standards. But also, if you go to this page and scroll down, there is also a guide to how do you actually become certified as well. But I'd say for now, thank you all very much for joining us. I'm sorry we've overrun very slightly. I'll just see if there is oh, sorry, I have got just one or two more. We'll just try and squeak in under the edge. So somebody's saying their sheep are eating seed heads of grasses in the rotation. We do have within our standards, we say if you are doing a grass, if you're doing a rotational grazing system and things are naturally going to seed, we do count that as incidental. Interestingly, the question, Mike, is if sheep are eating a lot of you know, grass that has gone to seed, is that likely to be having an impact on the nutritional quality of the meat and milk?
Oh gosh, that's a difficult one. It's going to depend very much on the starch content of the seeds, but my guess, and it is only a guess, is that the starch content of the seeds from grasses as such would be very small, and I would expect it to have little impact on the nutritional benefits.
Okay, and then thanks Mike. And then I've got another one which is you know, a valid point. There's somebody saying about the enrichments and cow brushes, and saying that we should be avoiding plastic being used for our enrichments, and things like a plantation of scratching trees would be a better answer. And I mean, there's probably a way that, you know, if people are doing you know, to be able to have a tree branch in your house that that's bolted or suspended that the animals can scratch under as well. But it was a good point that if we're talking about being sustainable, having lots of plastic brushes that might get broken and contaminate the soil is not ideal. So I'll just passing that on from the person that's raised that as a comment. And now I think that really is all our questions now. I say if there is anything final that we didn't get to, please email us afterwards. But thank you very much for your time and attention. Thanks. Bye-bye.